Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Dan Monheit. Dan, welcome to the pod.
Hey, thanks for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
I love to hear that. So just by way of background, in 2005, Dan founded creative behavioural science agency HardHat. And up until 3 weeks ago, we're chatting just prior to recording, up until 3 weeks ago, Dan successfully ran HardHat, worked with a who's who of brands, including Mattel, Bega Dairy, the Victorian Government, Kogan, DocuSign, Afterpay, and many, many more. And in October 2024, HardHat was successfully acquired by Thinkerbell, and Dan has just started the role of Chief CX Thinker at Thinkerbell. So Dan, congratulations and welcome to the pod.
Thank you. And thank you for also saying my new title, because it still catches me off guard when people ask what I do.
I just don't know how you can do 20 years in one role and kind of move into a new office with new people and it must be very strange.
It is a bit strange, but it's also kind of wonderful. The Thinkerbell team are incredible. And because basically the whole agency came over, we're in this amazing new environment with a whole bunch of people that we already know. So it's been a really wonderful first 3 weeks, and everyone's settled in well, clients are settling in, and it's looking good.
That's awesome. I'm going to just throw this little curveball at you. So when Dan and I connected on LinkedIn, and when you sold your LinkedIn post, I really love this. Your LinkedIn post read, "I'd love to tell 24-year-old me that we will in fact make payroll 236 months in a row and that everything will work out pretty." I think it's just an awesome quote. And I think to get through 1 year in business is really hard. And to get through 5 is generally phenomenal. But to get to kind of 20, and I just like that perspective. I think it says a lot about what you've achieved, and you should be very proud.
Thank you. It's funny how many people have commented to me on that. And last week, pay went through, and I don't know how, but it just did. I don't know if there were funds in the account, who had to approve what, but it was a funny feeling.
It must be liberating in some ways, not have to worry about a bunch of stuff that you used to.
Yeah, so lots of new challenges, but it's quite nice to leave some old challenges to the very talented team here to take care of.
Nice one, love it. Just in terms of, I'd just like to go back a little bit before we go forward. But like, how did you enter behavioral sciences in marketing, and like, what made you start HardHat all that time ago?
Sure. So starting HardHat, there's a slightly separate but obviously related stories. So starting HardHat back in 2005, I studied marketing and management. I had a job that I held for almost 6 months, which was horrendous. My longtime friend, Justin Cabani, had studied creative advertising, was having a tough time getting work, as is the case for a lot of sort of first-year advertising people.
Yep.
And we just decided we'd try and do something together. And at the time, neither of us could have named you as well. I certainly couldn't have named you a single advertising agency. And this was long before startup culture. So as far as our parents knew, we weren't doing a startup. We were just unemployed. And we had grand ambitions to be doing big, interesting, creative work. I found out very quickly nobody was interested in purchasing that from two 24-year-olds with no experience. But this was very, very early days of the internet. So this was pre-mobile, pre-social. This was when YouTube didn't really exist. Google was one of 10 search engines you might turn to. And people seemed interested in asking us to help with digital things. And this was an area where our youthful good looks and our complete lack of commercial experience didn't seem to be an issue for anybody. So very quickly, we took on a bunch of digital work, hired some people, and before we knew it, we were sort of 25 with staff and an office and obligations and a business. And the long story short is we probably spent 10, 12 years as a digital agency and all the things that a digital agency was over the years. So, you've been in the game a while, so you might remember from websites and emails to flash games and mobile apps and social and content and web apps. And then 5 or 6 years ago, we said, hey, we've got this opportunity to really swing back and try and be this modern creative agency. And we started building up that other side of the business. And when we joined with Thinkerbell, we're probably half digital CXy work and half more creative work. So that's the short agency story. Behavioral science is a thing that has matured along the same time as the agency has, really, as a field that people are interested in. In uni, I studied marketing and management. I remember being an early economics classes, learning about these core principles of supply and demand. And if apples are $1, X people want them, but if they become cheaper, more people want them. If they become more expensive, less people want them.
Yeah.
You're nodding knowingly. Were you in these same classes?
Oh, look, I mean, first of all, it's kind of refreshing to be speaking to someone who was running a digital agency when Google wasn't the only
Yes.
search engine in the country. Just
Yeah.
showing our age. I mean, I did a law degree and a communications degree, so kind of I think
Okay.
similar to you, right? Like coming out of that, we just found ourselves in digital marketing because that was the place where, yeah, like a 23-year-old kid that didn't know what they were doing could get given approval to spend large budgets.
Exactly. Well,
And
the large budgets maybe don't seem like large budgets now, but at the
yeah,
time,
yeah,
$500, what?
exactly right.
So I'm at uni learning these core economic concepts. And at the same time, I was working at the Nike factory store in Collingwood. And so for your listeners who are not from Melbourne, not from Australia, or too old or too young to know what Smith Street Collingwood looked like in the early 2000s, I think we would call it pre-gentrification would maybe be the nice way to refer to it.
Coolest street in the world, apparently.
Yeah. So it was just a lot of druggies and a lot of factory outlet stores back then. But in working there, one of the things I realized, apart from how many people are happy to just steal stuff, was people aren't behaving like they're telling me at university. And I'm watching people come in and buy things because they're expensive. And I'm noticing that when I bring shoes from out the back, people seem to want them more because it seems that there's something special about them. And groups of kids would come in all wearing the same shoes. And so I already had this weird disconnect that the textbooks are interesting, but they don't seem to really match up with what I'm seeing in the real world. And so I started exploring and reading and sort of diving down through, I think Freakonomics was probably the first book that I read that sort of told me I was on the right track. I think about actually reading Freakonomics as like the first time somebody gave me a Snoop Dogg album in the early 90s because their brother was a DJ. I was like, this is what I was looking for. I didn't know what it was, but now I've got it. And I just went deep down the rabbit hole. And then the sort of, as the agency was growing and the briefs were growing, I had this realization, hang on, every brief is a behavior change brief. Whether the client says it on the brief or not, if they're paying us money, it's because they want a thing that's not happening to start to happen. And why is there so little research in the field of marketing about behavior and why people do the things that they do? And just little, like 5 degrees to the left, if we just tilt our vision, there's 7 years worth of research about why people do the weird and wonderful things that they do. Maybe we should look at that. And so that's sort of how the two have come together. And that has had wonderful results for us and our clients across both the digital work and the creative comms work. So
great
long
story.
answer to a short question.
Awesome. It's and like how would you, I think you might have already done this, but in terms of explaining behavioral psychology in the context of marketing, and I guess those I guess the reason you're on the pod is that Dan presented at South by Southwest. I was in the audience, and it was just an awesome session, and it was kind of talking a lot around behavioral psychology in marketing, and then I guess the ethics of, right, when is it just awesome marketing and when is it a little bit potentially manipulative? And I think most of us marketers are like, let's lean.
Jobs manipulation.
That's right. Ethical manipulation to give people what they need, Dan.
Yes. Keep the world spinning.
But yeah.
So as far as what it is and how it works. So if you've never heard of behavioral economics or behavioral science, this is a field of study that kicked off in the 1950s. And in the 70 years since has built up oceans of evidence based on thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed studies, helping us understand why people do the things that they do. And at the core of behavioral science is, I wouldn't even say an acceptance, I would say a two-armed bear hug embrace of the idea that we are nowhere near the rational decision makers that we'd like to think we are. And that in reality, the vast majority of our decisions, and we make thousands and thousands of decisions a day, the vast majority of them are based on emotion, based on biases, based on the context within which we make those decisions. And one of the key findings of behavioral science is this idea of heuristics, which are common, consistent, predictable quirks that we are all at times subject to, that often result in us doing things that make no objective sense at all. So if you imagine all of the weird and wonderful things we do as humans, we stand outside full restaurants while empty restaurants across the street wait for us. We go and smash ourselves at a gym class at 6 a.m. and then reward ourselves for doing that with a muffin and a milkshake at 11 a.m. We, save for home deposits and then reward ourselves for saving on home deposits by buying new sneakers. We do all these weird and crazy things, and there are biases or heuristics that help us understand all of them. And once you know what they are, you can start building products and brands and campaigns and services and businesses around them. And I almost think about them as cheat codes for the game of sales.
That's a great definition. I was kind of keen to go through some of the ones that you talked about at South by Southwest. So there was one which was default bias. Maybe if we could just explain that and maybe share some examples of.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, I mean, in the world of behavioral science, there are 200 to 300 different biases that have been observed and recorded. So we can do hours of this, but let's get into a couple of the more common ones. And once you start seeing these in your life, you can't unsee them. You just realize they're everywhere. So default bias is the idea, excuse me. Default bias is the idea that when given a default course of action, we will take it a disproportionately large amount of the time. And often in life, we are given options, and our brains don't love doing the work to objectively work out which of these is the best option. Danny Kahneman, founding father of behavioral science, says thinking for humans is like swimming for cats. We would just prefer not to. So defaults are really powerful. When you give somebody a default course of action, there's a good chance they're going to take it. So before the one job that I had, corporate job, and before the Nike job, I spent 4 years working at McDonald's. And one of the things you learn working at McDonald's is when somebody comes and orders a Big Mac meal, the only correct response is that a large? And chances are people will say yes, but you don't ask what size, you say, is that a large? And people will tend to say yes because the alternative to saying yes is to actually engage your brain about how hungry am I? How thirsty am I? What is the price difference between a small and a medium and a large? When did I last eat? When will I next eat? I'll just take a large because that's easy. And the guy working here with the visor and the clip-on tie has suggested a large, and he clearly knows what's going on. So that's probably the right thing to do.
You could imagine the difference if the question was flipped, right? And it was like, is that a small?
People would say, yes. Yeah, exactly. So this is a thing that I use in my daily life when I'm trying to get meetings with somebody. If you say to somebody, hey, I'd love to catch up with you next week, what are some times that are available? You think about the work that you have just created for them. If you say to somebody, hey, I'd love to catch up with you next week, I could do Wednesday at 3. Does that work for you? It's easy for them and you're more likely to get a yes. We see this, digital interfaces are very easy reference grounds for this sort of stuff. So if you think about purchasing a flight, and there's different options with baggage, without baggage, cancelable, not cancelable, flexible, not flexible, they will give you a default. And we tend to take them. So this is one of many, many tools that a marketer can have in their toolkit to try and nudge sales in a particular direction.
Really interesting. I was kind of, when you're talking, I can't imagine being, in your friend or family group, just the way that you're kind of cajoling and manipulating and
one of the hazards.
Talk you tomorrow at 3 p.m.
Yes. Yeah. One of the sales techniques I use on my kids a lot is something called an alternate close, where you give somebody 2 different options to buy something, both of which result in them buying it. So if you take this today, we can either put it on credit card, or what we can do is put it on Afterpay or whatever. Which one would be better for you? And now I'm deciding between the 2 payment options. I'm not deciding whether I should buy this or not.
Do you want to do your teeth first, or do you want to do X first before that?
So exactly. So I will give my kid the option of do you want to have a shower and then do your teeth, or do you want to do your teeth and then have a shower? And their brains are thinking about which order they want to do it in, and the debate's up. Unfortunately for me, just knowing that these things exist, though, do not make you immune from them. And I find myself often doing stupid things because I've been tricked into them. And maybe I get retrospective understanding of what I've just done, but it often doesn't stop me in the moment.
Isn't it brilliant? I mean, you must live your life just looking at all the way these things are applying in real work. I did, because this is not the core of my space, right? So I did do some research, and a good use of default bias I thought was really interesting one was around organ donation.
Oh,
And the
yes.
presumption used to be that you didn't check it, and they basically changed it so it was checked and you had to opt out of it, and it became just revolutionary in terms of the uptake.
Absolutely. I mean, there are countries in Europe that had organ donation rates 98, 99 plus, and then you would have similar countries in other parts of the Western world, like Australia and America and Canada, or wherever, that were in the teens.
Amazing.
And you look at it and you say, what is going on here? What is wrong with people in these countries? Why are they so selfish? And 100% to your point, the option was the default. In Australia, when you get a driver's license, that you defaulted out unless you say, I'm in.
Yeah.
In many other countries, you're defaulted in unless you say, I'm out.
So it's fascinating, isn't it? The next one that you kind of talked about at South by Southwest was framing. Really interesting device.
Yeah. So this is the idea that the context is far more important than the content. And we can perceive the exact same thing in different ways when it's presented in a different frame. And so the idea of undertaking an operation with a 95% success rate feels better than an operation where 1 in 20 people die.
Mm.
But it's the same thing. It's a different framing. And when we think about how everything from dairy products advertised with are they 3% fat or are they 97% fat free? To, we see this with bug spray and all sorts of things like that. The same content presented differently can completely change the way we react to it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, it does, like, just on the face of it, the idea of a 95% success rate, I'll take that.
Yeah.
A 1 in 20 chance of dying, or a bit less likely to want to engage.
A lot of these biases feed into each other. So there's something else called anchoring. And anchoring is how we tend to put too much emphasis on the first piece of information we get when we are in an unfamiliar setting. So you want to go and buy a barbecue. You don't know how much a barbecue should cost. The first barbecue you see is $6,000. All of a sudden, the $3,000 barbecue that you now see doesn't seem crazy expensive. Whereas if the first barbecue you'd seen was $300, the $3,000 one seems completely crazy. So it's sort of an example of framing where how a $3,000 barbecue can feel cheap or expensive depending on what it's sitting next to.
And that's one which, because that is a device which I think that I've come across before professionally, right? And that when you were talking before about these devices being used on you and you still can't escape the effect. And I find that one just to be so true. You walk into a car dealership, showroom, and they put out all the cars with all the specs, whatever else, huge price tags on them. I mean, okay, that's what this thing costs. And then when you actually start to speak to the dealer and we can give you this discount and that discount, and suddenly the ridiculous price you otherwise would never have considered becomes quite, okay, that's actually a bit of a bargain. Or walking into a retail store where there's a black t-shirt for $300. And then, then the belt that's $280 doesn't look so bad, Yeah,
it's leather. The belt is leather.
How do they do it cheap?
With this one, I also think about, when something breaks in your house, let's say your dishwasher breaks, and the person goes, let's say your dishwasher breaks and the person comes to repair it and they have a quick look and they say, look, I think this is probably going to be around $500 to fix, but let me have a proper look and I'll come back to you. And instead what happens is you go away, you come back and I say, hey, look, I've had a look at it and it's actually not going to be 500. All of these things are wrong with it. And it's probably going to be more like 800. And you're like, oh man, $800, that sucks. I can't afford this right now. Situation 2 is person comes in to look at your dishwasher. They say, hey, this looks pretty bad. You're probably going to need a new one. It's probably going to set you back $2,000 or $3,000, but let me have a look and see if there's anything I can do. Come back half an hour later. They're like, hey, you actually don't need a new one. I found the issue. It's going to be $800 to fix. How do you feel about that? And you're like, yes, $800 to fix this thing. That is brilliant. And so again, it's the exact same outcome for the exact same price. The only thing that changed is the framing that it sits within.
But how are you working with clients in this type of, not necessarily framing specifically, but maybe, default biases or framing, just practically, how are you working with clients to use those devices within campaigns and creative and product design and whatever it might be?
Sure. So let me give you a sort of really high-end example and then a really low-end example.
Yeah.
So a really high-end example is a client has a new product. And one of the first things I'll always wonder is, and one of the first things I'll always wonder is this an aspirin product or is this a multivitamin product? So an aspirin product is something that takes pain away, gets you back to normal. A multivitamin product is a product that says, hey, you're at normal and I'm going to take you to some extra level. The same product can be both, but the way you frame it and the way you talk about it is going to be completely different. And what we know more often than not is people are far more willing to pay for an aspirin, for something to take pain away, than they are to pay for something that will take them to an elevated state. Similarly, if a client, a snack food client comes up with a new snack bar, the same snack bar could be the tastiest thing in the health aisle or the healthiest thing in the confectionery aisle. What frame do we want to put around this? And so you start shaping everything from packaging and naming and messaging and advertising accordingly. Like, what is this thing going to be for?
That's it.
At a really high level. And, when you go down the confectionery aisle, there's no real objective reason why, this chocolate is for taking a break and this chocolate is for when you're hungry and this chocolate is for saying thank you. And this chocolate is when you just need a little pick me up before a meal. The only reason that is true is because the ads told us, because somebody decided that's what this thing is going to be for. So that's how we can use it, at a really sort of high-end level. At a much lower level, if we think about clients we have in utility spaces, so people saying, selling phone plans or energy products, and you are looking for ways to bring customers on board or to get them to choose one particular plan over another plan. You can frame things differently. So, the order that you put the pricing in, the one that you highlight, the one that you show as popular, the one that you show as only available today, are all going to impact the way in which people select them. And as long as it's true and as long as it's ethical, we would not be doing our jobs properly if we didn't look for ways to nudge people in the correct direction.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So interesting. Another one that you talked about at the conference is loss aversion.
Yeah. So this one is the idea that we are twice as motivated to avoid losses as we are to get gains. It's a bit like that aspirin multivitamin thing. So losses feel really bad for us emotionally. And the studies show that they feel about twice as bad as the equivalent gains. So if you lost $10 in the street, you would need to find $20 in an old pair of jeans to come out emotionally even. So getting people to feel like they already own something can make them more willing to buy it or make it feel more painful if they decide to walk away from it, which is why things like test drives for cars are really important, which is why giving people really easy ways to start using new software is really important, because as soon as it feels like it's mine and it starts rusting on, the pain of losing it starts to overwhelm the joy of getting something else.
Yeah. And as you were saying it, so that turn of phrase, don't lose your X, don't lose your discount, or don't lose your whatever it might be, that personalization of yours. I've never, really thought of that too much.
Yeah, they're really trying to make you feel like this is a thing that is going to be gone from your life forever if you don't activate it.
It's fascinating.
It's valuable.
Fascinating stuff. And I think, and then the last of the actual, I guess, tools or devices, because as you said, there's hundreds of them, but one that I thought was really interesting at the conference was effort bias. If we could just talk a little bit about effort bias and the application of that.
For sure. This is one of my favorites. And this is the idea that as humans, many, many times a day, we are required to decide the value of something. We're not very good at doing that in any objective way. So we have little shortcuts. And one of the shortcuts we use is how much effort do we think went into making this thing? And the research says that the more effort we perceive has gone in, the more value we believe comes out. So there's been lots of studies done on this. The sort of seminal one, I think it was from a researcher called Sakdeva in 2009. It brought participants in, split them randomly into two groups, gave each group a set of poems. Actually, maybe it was 2005. It was anyway, they reviewed these poems and then were asked to rate and review these poems based on the quality of the poem, their overall enjoyment reading the poem, and how much money they thought a poetry magazine should pay to publish that poem in their publication. I'll get the numbers wrong, but basically one group was told that the poems had taken something like 5 hours to write, and another group had been told that the exact same poems had taken 15 hours to write.
Mm.
And of course, the group that had been told they had taken longer to write consistently rated them as more enjoyable, of higher quality, of worth more money to a poetry magazine. And the same findings have turned up with amateurs and self-declared experts, with paintings, with pottery, with wine. It doesn't seem to matter if it has gone in, we think more value comes out.
And you see that, don't you, in kind of a luxury space, whether it's handmade something wine, or some kind of widget that, a watch that's been, painstakingly prepared by, a Swiss watchmaker versus coming out on a factory belt in China. We have a perceived feeling that there's more value there, right?
Absolutely. We want to buy the artisanal jam. We want to go to those local farmers markets and see the person who actually made this thing. And if we think about restaurant design, if you were going to open a fancy restaurant in any city in the world 20 or 30 years ago, the kitchen would be out the back and completely obscured from view, just with like a little pass, like in prison where they just slide the food backwards and forwards. Because I guess the belief at the time was people aren't here to see the mess and the chaos of the kitchen. So it's going to be out the back. You go to a great restaurant in any city in the world now, and where's the kitchen? So it's in the middle of the restaurant. And where are the best seats? Sitting around the kitchen, because we want to see the craft. We want to see the people working, and people rate the food better. They rate their experience as more enjoyable if they're watching the craft being performed in front of them.
And you can just see the marketing application of that, right? Across a whole range of different products and service offerings, right? It doesn't just have to be product, it can be service, right? And who's the person behind it? And
absolutely. And my steer for clients on this one is always, this isn't about adding complexity. This is about surfacing and celebrating the complexity that already exists. Like if you're in business and you have customers, something interesting is happening behind the scenes. And it might be from your people, it might be from your processes, it might be from the provenance of where your products come from. It might be from the pedigree of the business and the history of the business, but someone has put in more effort than anybody would ever expect them to. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So maybe what we should do is think about interesting ways to showcase that. And it doesn't always have to be as straight as we've discussed. I mean, the John West, the famous ads of the fisherman fighting with the bear to get the best tuna, like that is a beautiful encapsulation of the effort bias. I mean, actually showing a fisherman sort through fish markets would not be very compelling viewing, but seeing a bar fight between a fisherman and a bear is quite good, and it tells the same story in a much more interesting way.
Yeah, totally. How do you because we've just gone through kind of 6 devices, I guess, or tools or whatever you might call them. You kind of mentioned there's hundreds of them, right? How do you, when you're given a job, right? It's okay, this is a SaaS business and we're trying to increase X, or this is an energy provider and we're trying to do Y. How are you determining which of these tools you're using? Like, is it a checklist where we go through every single one, or is it one where you go, nah, bang on, this is the one device we need to go hard in on, or we're going to use, okay, how do you kind of approach that?
Yeah. So to answer, I just got to add a few little disclaimers and context. So one is behavioral science is a pretty messy field still. So it's still relatively new. And I don't know if we'll ever have, but we certainly today do not have a periodic table of neatly ordered biases. And even just in our conversation, you can see often these sort of bump into each other.
Yeah, totally.
Anchoring is a bias and framing is a bias. And is there a defined hierarchy between these? We don't really know. So as a starting point, it's messy. The other thing is when behavioral science is deliberately used in marketing, obviously, when behavioral science is deliberately used in marketing, oftentimes it is referred to as nudge theory. So it is not massive tectonic change theory. It is nudge theory. And so we're around the edges here. If you fundamentally hate spinach, there's no bias that's really, to get you to try it. So we are around the edges and we're testing and we're learning and we're experimenting all the time. There is no bias that works on all people in all contexts all the time. However, in my own programming, what I've come to realize is there are maybe 4 key types of problems that every brief is seeking to address. So it might be an awareness issue that we need more people to know about our product. It might be a value perception issue that we want people to be willing to pay more for this thing, the competitors. It might be a conversion issue that people know us and they like us, but we're just losing them at that last click.
Mm.
Or it might be a product portfolio design issue where we're trying to work out how our products should sit with each other and within the category. And so within each of those 4, I've got my little laundry list of, from experience, from my research, from my intuition, these are the handful of biases that are most fruitful when we're looking at a product portfolio question versus a conversion rate question, but it's pretty open.
Yeah, that's a great response. I think that helps to just, I think for my own curiosity is that like, how does all this stuff fit together,
Yeah. Thank you. It is still, I mean, I think for me, one of the most exciting things about this space is it is still evolving so much, and more big brains are realizing this is interesting,
Mm.
and more big brains from, it's always had academic big brains in it. What I'm loving is how many other marketing and comms and business people are saying, hey, we can go and do a whole bunch of research, or we can look at this huge, treasure trove of research that already exists, and maybe we can work out how to apply some of that outside of academic situations and into the real world.
It is interesting. So much of, because I think we both come from a really, I hadn't realized before the conversation, we both come from such a similar background in kind of early stage digital. And
Mm.
I remember reading the Robert Cialdini book Influence
Yeah.
it would have been mid 2000s. And it was nothing, I think there was some ABC show at the time, some comedy show, and he was on it, I think. And I found it just
Really?
fascinating. Yeah. And I read the book and I thought it was a fascinating book, right? And obviously it does relate to business and it relates to sales and marketing, obviously. But then he just, like, probably 10 years after that, just popped up as this kind of massive guy in digital marketing from a
Yeah.
CRO viewpoint. And
Yes.
so much of it, this does feel like CRO related, right? And as you said, I can't make people eat spinach and like spinach if they don't want to eat it. But when you're talking about, kind of, as you said, framing and nudging and evolving and changing little bits and pieces that move people towards a business outcome that you want, you can see how the subject matter applies itself.
Yeah. I can't make you eat spinach if you don't like it, but if you do like it, I reckon I can get you to buy my one, not the private label one, if that's the
Yeah.
brief that I've been given.
Yeah, love it. In terms of the discussion at South by Southwest, it was a great topic. It was brilliant marketing or dark arts. Are you convincing or conning your customers? And it was kind of you on a panel with a lady who was she from ADMA?
Adma,
She's
yes.
ADMA, and probably looking at like regulation and kind of what's falling within consumer law and misleading deceptive conduct. And I think the room was probably 90% marketers, and we're all there going, yeah, that seems fine to be doing those types of things.
Yeah.
But what is that, like, how do you define the difference between persuasion and manipulation in marketing? And you've got kids and seem like a good guy. Like, what's the line, right?
Don't
Like,
be deceived. Don't be deceived. My job is to look like a good guy.
I just reckon you're there going, like, after this, you're going to work out how you can make people buy spinach that don't eat it.
So there's a few ways to tackle this. So Sala, who she's great. She spent a lot of time doing this. She talks a lot about dark patterns. So maybe the macro answer to your question is there are things that are just illegal, and they're illegal as a marketer, whether you are doing them online or on packaging or in store or whatever. You just can't lie. You can't be outwardly deceptive. You can't do lots and lots of things like that. There's also lots of things that are very much in. You can say your product is delicious, and you can say that you use all natural ingredients if that's what you do. So the edges are kind of fine.
Mm-hmm.
Where things get tricky is in the middle. And the term manipulation gets thrown around a lot, and it feels like it has this inherently negative tone to it. But if manipulation is getting people to take a course of action that they weren't necessarily planning to do, like, That's our job. Like that is literally what we all do. We get people to buy the thing they maybe didn't realize that they wanted to buy. And so if we don't use all of our best tools and all of our best endeavors to do that, then we are not doing the job that our clients are engaging us to do.
Yeah, to your comment before, it's if I want to make someone buy more of my spinach than someone else's, so it's you're representing yogurt brand A, and
Yep.
someone else is selling yogurt brand B. Do you want to be the 20% fat, 20% fat, or do you want to be the 80% fat free? Right?
Yeah.
If that's manipulating to increase your product over the other, you're not lying, you're not misleading, you're
Yeah.
using tool
Doing the job.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And the other thing to consider, just as we get the baseline. So the baseline is brands and businesses and marketers and agencies exist to change behavior. If we're not changing behavior, we're not doing our jobs. So we should try and do as good a job of it as we can.
Mm.
The other baseline I think is really important is you can't not design the choice. So if you are getting people to choose from 5 different yogurts, the order that you put them in, how you describe them, like impacts the one that people choose.
Mm.
So you can't opt out of this. If you are going to be giving people environments to make choices, you can't not manipulate the way they choose.
Mm.
So your choice is, do I do this ignorantly or do I do this mindfully and knowingly?
Mm.
So that's sort of the baseline. Our job is to change behavior. So then the question is, well, what happens with this middle ground? And one of the things Sala spoke about a lot was these things called dark patterns. And these are things that are not necessarily illegal, might become illegal, but currently not illegal, but very much down the dark gray end of things that you can do. And so these are, deceptive design tactics specifically set up to manipulate users into doing things that are probably not in their own best interest, but are in the best interest of the business. And so these are things like signing people up to free trials without really mentioning all that much that as soon as the free trial is over, we are billing your credit card forever and a day. Or signing people up to things that are very, very hard to unsubscribe from, where, you've signed up online, but you unsubscribe, you have to call them in a European time zone on a Monday or a Tuesday from Australia and have your passport, like just crazy things like that. Or confirm shaming is one that she talked about, where yes, you can unsubscribe, but to unsubscribe from this whatever meal planning service, you have to click a button that says, yes, unsubscribe because I don't care about my health and I want to stay as a fat slob until the day that I die. Yes, unsubscribe. So all of these things that are like shady and not nice and icky, but are technically often still legal, is where a lot of these gray lines
Yeah.
are.
And that's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think for me, like the first example there, and I felt this in the room, if you sign up for a 7-day free trial and you put your credit card details in and it's made clear at the time of doing so that if you don't cancel within that window of time, you will be charged on the 8th day, and that will continue to happen. I just do not see the ethical problem with that. I think there's a balance, right? When you're dealing with SaaS businesses or connected TV type services where it becomes very difficult to actually find the screen to cancel. That's obviously, if you're bearing something to a point where it can't be found, then to me, I think the consumer law would deal with that. I think with misleading and deceptive conduct, I would have thought. The second example, once again, I think the idea that I think from a UX perspective, you'd want to be able to cancel something using the same kind of mechanism that you signed up online, to the phone center. But I think as long as the phone center is in, Australian time zone and you can access it for the cost of a local call. I mean, I had one, I think it was the Boston Globe I signed up to, and it was literally impossible to cancel. It was unbelievable. I think, and that probably be atypical for an overseas subscription, but literally could not call and cancel. And it was such an inexpensive amount of money. It's like, I'm not going to sit online. I'm not going to sit on phone for 3 hours.
I know.
$9 thing. And then the third one, I think, if a brand wants to put itself in that context, I think the brand's probably going to come off worse, right? If they're but I think weighting a cancellation with, do I actually want to lose some kind of benefit. I think probably ethically okay, but whether you're going to call someone a fat slob seems a bit.
Oh yeah, well, I didn't call them.
Uh,
They just called themselves that by clicking the button. Yeah. On the second one, yeah, I wonder if there is some ratio between ease of sign up and ease of unsubscribe that we're comfortable with. And then at some point when it's super easy to sign up and super impossible to unsubscribe, it feels off. And I wonder if it's got to be 1-to-1 or if it can be twice as hard to unsubscribe as it was to sign up. We're like, well, that's fair enough. You know, or, you know, if there is a comfort level that we would have with that.
I think it does. The internet has meant that we as individuals have so much more power to make decisions about brands, reviews, reputation, whatever it might be. And I think there's also a blowback, right? If we're using these devices in such an obvious and kind of hammer-like way. This is not really backing up my point, but in the room at South by Southwest, there was a guy who when we were talking about that whole 7-day trial thing, and he was talking about a particular software SaaS provider who actually emails the day before saying, are you sure you want to be billed? And I thought, wow, that's actually like a massive tick to that brand. And then our whole room is hearing that this brand did such a great job of being so open and transparent. The fact I've forgotten it kind of maybe disperses a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think these things also have to kind of meld with the type of brand and business you want to be, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the things the internet has done for business, for dating, for lots of things is led people to believe there's just so much abundance out there that I can just burn the next 50 people. It doesn't matter because there's another one born every minute. And like a lot of marketing decisions, you're choosing between a short-term benefit and a long-term benefit. You can lie on your packaging and you're going to sell more, saying it was fresh when it wasn't. But at some point, people are going to work it out and they're going to stop buying. And so I think one of the things in the internet, it's harder to get that short-term sale because there's so much competition. But if you burn it, there's just this sense that, well, we'll just dial up our ad spend and we'll just get some more people in who won't unsubscribe before the 7-day trial's over. It's a tricky balancing act.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? I mean, kind of conversations around brand and reputation and the impact of bottom line on the long term of that, right?
Yes.
Any other kind of dark patterns or kind of gray areas which you find, like maybe you find challenging yourself or you find really difficult for your clients when they're making decisions in this space?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's tricky is the importance of context. And I think this actually came up in the room, how sometimes the same mechanism can be perceived in a completely different way because of the context that it's in. Which I guess, wearing shorts to the pool or shorts to a wedding, they're the same shorts. The context makes it feel okay or not okay. And I think the example we talked about on the day, and I make no judgments. We're living in Australia. There are lots of things that are legal that I don't personally enjoy. Like gambling is one of them. And so if we spoke about defaults earlier. So if we take that as an example and we say, okay, you go to a charity website and your intention is to make a $50 donation. And when you go onto the donate page, you type in the $50 and then the default setting is make this a monthly subscription, make this a monthly donation. And you have to untick it to say, no, thanks, just make it a one-off. We might say, well, maybe it's slightly cheeky or slightly presumptuous, but by and large, I'm pretty good with that. If we take that exact same interface and apply it to an online gambling website where your intention is to go and put $50 into your account at once, and the default setting is add $50 to my account every month, and you have to untick that and say, no, thanks, please just make this a one-time contribution. For me, it has a different feel. It has an ickier, more sinister feel, even though it's the same device. And so that's where we just got to sort of check ourselves. Does this thing we're recommending make sense for this type of audience, for this type of brand, for this type of category? Or does the context mean it's actually not good here and we wouldn't do it?
It's really interesting, isn't it? And as you're talking, it kind of therefore makes sense as to why certain sectors in the country have different standards of advertising.
Exactly.
Like medical products are different to, if we're selling, like muesli bars in a shop.
Exactly.
There are regulations around gambling, right? I think because there is that. But yeah, it is such a fascinating intersection, isn't it, in terms of ethics and commerce and consumer law with
Yes.
kind of, it's a really fascinating space.
Yes. And outside of the edges, it's to a large degree unregulatable, and we probably don't want our politicians regulating to the letter how we can and can't show that this product is popular or not popular.
Yeah.
The rule of thumb that I use for myself is I ask myself, if the customer knew we were doing this, how would they feel about it? And so again, if we think about phone plans and somebody said, I'm a small business owner, show me the phone plans you have available. And we've got 4 phone plans here. And one of them says popular with small businesses. If I'm doing that because that plan really is popular with small businesses, because it is the best plan for them, and the customer knew that's why I put that star there, that says popular, they'd probably be okay with it, even knowing that that means more people are going to pick it.
Mm.
If the truth was, well, it's popular with me because I make the most commission on that one, and that's why I've done it, the customer probably would not be okay with it. So putting a popular starburst on a thing that actually is versus
Ideally.
isn't, yeah, is a way I think about it. So if the customer knew, or if my mother knew what was happening on here, would she be okay with it? If yes, it's probably good. If not, I probably need to think about it a different way.
Great litmus test. Been an awesome conversation. For marketers listening that are really interested in the field and in this space and getting deeper, like where would you recommend, like what kind of resourcing and resources and places to go to learn more?
So I haven't recorded for a long time. Actually, it's wonderful to be back on the show. I missed podcasting, but I did I would say a wonderful series called Bad Decisions. I was co-hosted with Dr. Melissa Weinberg, and we did probably 30 or 40 episodes, the early episodes, where we'd go through one bias each episode. And she would talk about the research, the academic stuff, the brain science. I would talk about the implications for marketers and business people. So the episodes were maybe 20 minutes each, and they're a really good way to get little bite-sized understandings of what these things are and some examples of how you can use them. Books that are always a go-to for me. Nudge is a great one. Anything by Dan Ariely is a great one. And Rory Sutherland, I think Alchemy is a really good one as well.
Yeah, he's awesome, isn't he? Mate, it's been a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming onto the pod. I end every episode with the question, what's the best piece of advice you'd give to an Australian marketer? Can be career advice, can be anything you want it to be.
The best piece of advice I would say is to follow your curiosity. That, marketing has become such a broad textured space, and it's very easy to feel like you can never be across it all, because you can't. But there are enough deep pockets of interesting things for everybody. And so if you're more of a data marketing person, I would say pursue that. There are riches there. If you are more of a brand and emotion-led marketer, pursue that. If there are verticals or channels, just follow your curiosity and good things tend to happen.
That's a great bit of advice. And yeah, if anyone does want to get in contact, what's the best way?
LinkedIn, I'm pretty active over there. You can find me, Dan Monheit, it's Monheit. Otherwise, check out the Thinkerbell website and drop us a note through there.
Legend. Thanks, mate.
Awesome. Great chatting with you.